Champlain Basin. I'm going to be participating a little bit in this session, kind of as a presenter, but primarily we're going to have three other presenters giving this presentation. It's going to be Audrey Schmidt, who's the Director of Business Development and Strategic Partnerships for Propagate, Mandy St. Hilaire, who many of you have probably worked with before she was with Propagate. She's the Project Resource Manager for Propagate. And then we also have Teddi Stark, who's joining us from Pennsylvania. She's the Watershed Forestry Program Manager. So in some ways, kind of my counterpart in Pennsylvania. And she was with the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources Bureau of Forestry. So Audrey, I am assuming that you're steering and are going to share your screen.
Absolutely. Let me just quickly share this. All right, that should be good. It's my hope. Great. Yep. All right. Well, really excited to be here today and excited to connect with professionals up in Vermont doing the good work that you all are doing. So excited to share a little bit about what we are doing as well around riparian buffers. So just really quickly, there are beautiful faces, even though you can also obviously see us here. We'll put this slide up at the end so you guys can grab our emails in case any follow-ups that you want. But really quickly at a high level, you know, you folks probably already know this, but agroforestry is a splendid thing. It can be a variety. It's basically the strategic integration of trees into agricultural systems. So the 5 recognized practices by USDA are alley cropping, riparian forest buffers, windbreaks, silvopasture, and then forest farming, of course. And so just as a quick reminder for you all, in case you don't know, NRCS recognizes some of these practices in Vermont and New York, and others are not. So really briefly on that, riparian buffers are recognized practice in both Vermont and New York. In Vermont, you also guys have windbreak establishment. In New York, windbreak renovation is an accepted practice, and multi-story cropping, which is another name for forest farming. Important to note, silvopasture and alley cropping are not currently recognized practices in the states of New York and Vermont, but they are recognized at the federal level. So that is a solution that is kind of being driven forward in some other states. So I think just an interesting thing to note there. But we're here today to talk about agroforestry in the riparian areas. I think we all know that, I mean, I'm just preaching the choir here, the riparian area is incredibly important for a myriad of reasons, from habitat creation to helping to improve water quality. It's really an important area to protect. And so what I would like to talk about today is specifically really differentiating between what we see as 3 different types or styles of riparian work that can be done. And so, you know, first off is a traditional conservation buffer. You know, I think typically you want that minimum width to be nothing less than 35 feet. Obviously, the more the merrier, but that's, you know, a traditional mix of conservation species might include redbuds, sycamores, oaks, you name it. But we've seen, especially in the past 10 years or so, a huge increase in interest around these multifunctional buffers. So getting into incorporating, you know, a few different species of plants that have co-benefits with them. So it might be that they're edible, you know, there's some exciting things. I should say multifunctional buffers don't have to be edible. You know, another one is cut flower production, you know, using 9 bark as an example for cut flower farms. So there's a lot of things that you can do there. If you guys take nothing else away from this presentation, I'd like you to take away the concept of scale. I think while there's been both excitement around multifunctional buffers, it is extremely challenging to create a commercial operation in that thin strip that is typically, as you guys know, one of the most difficult areas on any farm to really get equipment in and out of, you name it. You know, it's typically, there can be, you know, different stream banks that make it challenging, or, you know, you name it. So what I want to take away here is that this can be a great fit for certain farms, and can be a great fit, for example, if there's a family who's excited about putting elderberries in for them to make their own elderberry pies. Multifunctional buffers can be a great fit for them if it's a home scale operation that you're interested in. What Oh, and I also briefly want to show this photo because it's a beautiful photo and apparently was shown last year at this meeting, and I love it so much. So shout out to Stephanie Hurley, because I think this is a great visual. So thank you for making it. So this is an example of a highly diversified multifunctional buffer, which is really great and beautiful, but it's not commercial, I would argue. It's very hard to envision how, with such a highly diversified system, you could make a truly profitable operation. So what we're here to talk about, or at least a concept that Propagate is advancing with some of our other partners, is this concept of extreme buffers. And so it's sort of taking the multifunctional buffer concept, but expanding it so you can get to a scale that is truly profitable and commercial. And so the way that we design these is we ensure that there's always going to stay a traditional riparian buffer. So we aim for a minimum of 50 feet. The more the merrier, though, of course, however much we can get our landowners or farmers to agree to, the better. But then immediately adjacent, putting in commercial perennial cropping systems. So that could be, I'll dive into a few case studies in a second, but that could be a myriad of things such as silvopasture or a U-pick berry operation. Bless you, Allison. And so I'll dive into a few details there, but I hope folks can understand that difference, and happy to take questions there if people want to dive in. This is our definitions. This is by no means any official definitions, but this is how we conceptualize those differences. Thanks in part to Teddi, as well as some of her colleagues at the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, along with our partners, Stroud Water Research Center. We've been awarded funding to help support some farmers go from the analysis to actual implementation of some of these extreme buffer designs. So just wanted to show you guys here today a future extreme buffer that we're excited to be planting out next spring of 23. So just if you can envision how that will be an expanded buffer, and then immediately adjacent will actually be commercial elderberry production, which is really great for getting more perennials in the landscape, which we need for a myriad of reasons. But a quick background on Propagate. So Propagate, we are a agroforestry firm. We help folks identify the best fit fruit, nut, and timber crops to strategically and profitably integrate into their existing operation. And we work both with landowners as well as farmers. And a really key component, again, is going to that profitability piece. What can we do to actually make profitable agroforestry on these farms? And so we've created a software called Overyield that helps us do both the design side as well as the financial modeling over a 20 to 30 year period. So what I'm going to do is actually pop in to Overyield to show you guys. I hope you guys can see Overyield now, or the software. Okay, great. Thank you for nodding, Teddi. This is actually Sarah's Way. That's the farm in Montgomery County that I was just showing you all. This is the design that we are putting in place. It's actually 45 acres in total across their farm is what we'll be putting in. And Teddi, this is actually your first time seeing it, so I'm glad to be showing you as well. And so this is, we will be expanding their riparian area here. That's that photo you guys saw. And then here is the elderberry production that we're putting in. Again, going back to that scale question, they're going to be putting in a total of just a little over 12 acres of elderberry. That's a commercial amount of elderberry. You're not just talking about a home amount of producing syrup for your family. This is something where you can really talk about doing some value-added production, getting vertically integrated on your own farm so you can capture those profits. It really opens up a lot of doors once you start thinking at this kind of scale. I'll also just quickly note that in all of our designs, we include biodiversity rows. So this sort of orange row here is different biodiversity shrubs we'll be putting in. That is really important from an integrated pest management perspective. We make an assumption that all of our designs are going to be grown using certified organic practices. There's certainly a plus side on the marketing and pricing of the harvestable products as part of that, but we are able to adjust that if we have some of our clients who are more conventionally minded in how they'd like to do their production. I'll also just zoom in here so you guys can see each of these dots is a GPS enabled data point for specifically saying where that stem is going to grow. And when you're working on as large of scales as some of our projects are, it's incredibly important to be able to dive in and really get that specificity. And something else I'll show you, they're a highly diversified farm. And so they actually have several head of cattle as well. And so we'll be putting in some silvopasture systems as well for them, which is going to both help from a herd health perspective, as well as put more trees in the ground, which is really exciting to sort of flip the script about, dairy and beef production, that it can be part of the solution if you can integrate more trees into those landscapes. As well as I'll also say there's a lot of exciting research happening around fodder crops. And so that's putting in different crops like fodder mulberry or fodder willow, and that can be a really helpful food source for your livestock at particular times of year, and can help offset some of the costs of bringing in hay. For example, if you're buying in hay in the winter from your neighbors, if you have some fodder banks that you can kind of let your animals loose on and graze on, that can help offset your costs. I'm also, if any point people want to interrupt with questions, I'm totally happy for people to ask any questions. This is a context that's very different from Vermont, but I just like to show it very quickly. So this is actually a farm down in Texas that we are working with. They are a sheep operation. And this again, this is another silvopasture system, but again, sort of in an extreme buffer concept. These guys are not leveraging any sort of riparian funding for this, but they could maybe, is something I would say. So fodder mulberry along the perimeter of this main paddock, they've got cross fencing that's going to go in here. They really great rotational grazers. They're really accomplished grazers. And so what they wanted was to have fodder available for each of their animals in whatever paddock they were in. I'll also say something that is part of this design is this timber section, which is a quite highly densely packed black locust timber stand for them. And that's going to allow them in Texas, heat stress is a huge concern. So they can move their herd in on the hottest hours of the hottest day into that timber stand like a living barn. And that can be really helpful to help reduce animal stress on days like that. Popping back up north to Pennsylvania, just to show you guys another example. I actually think this example might be really good. I could imagine this could work well in different scenarios up in Vermont, but this is a highly diversified operation yet again. These folks started as diversified vegetable folks and have expanded beyond that. But they have this really beautiful, they just bought the land across the street from them. And so they have this new riparian area. And so they're interested in putting 3.6 acres in traditional riparian areas, and then immediately adjacent putting in hazelnut production, which is pretty exciting. So that's great. And that's actually working with genetics from the university, from Rutgers University, excuse me, that helps with those improved genetics. What they're putting in here, they're going to be putting in a farm store right here. And so what labor is one of their biggest concerns, which I think a lot of farms and a lot of operations, they're like, what do you mean I'm going to stack another operation? I've got my hands full as it is. So what they wanted to do was right next to where they're putting in this farm store, have some you pick mixed berries for folks to come in, and perennial berries that right near that store where folks can kind of take a container, go out there, come back and pay for it. So I think that this is a really exciting, this farmer was very smart about thinking about what was going to be the right fit for him. And we were able to help him think through the good, the bad, and the ugly of those different options. I'll also quickly note he's interested in putting in some timber windbreaks in between where he's growing small grain. He primarily does, I think it's barley. I'm going to get that wrong. I'm going to get that wrong. I'm pretty sure it's barley that he grows. It's something that he sends for distillers. So that's not my particular forte, but so having some windbreaks there is going to be really helpful for him for the long term. And again, adding more stems to the landscape. So going back to the presentation, I'm going to, with that, pass it off to Teddi, and I will make this a real slideshow again. Teddi, I can't hear you.
My microphone was muted. Hello. Now I am talking and people can hear me. Thank you. Thanks, Audrey. Do you want me to just tell you next slide and you'll drive the thing and that'll be good to go?
That's perfect. That's perfect.
Okay, awesome. So as we said earlier, my name is Teddi Stark. I am the Watershed Forestry Program Manager here in Pennsylvania. My position is a little weird. I work for the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, but I'm actually employed by the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy and then contracted to them. But anyway, go ahead to the next slide. In Pennsylvania, just do a little bit of background on what our buffer program looks like. So we have dedicated staff positions to work on watershed forestry, which is primarily buffers and a little bit of other stuff. Right now, there are 5 of us. We are working to hire 4 more, so soon there will be 9. We just came online in 2017, and our whole buffer initiative just really started in 2016. It's been driven heavily by the Chesapeake Bay and the total maximum daily load for the Chesapeake Bay. Pennsylvania is not entirely in the Bay watershed, about 2/3 of our state is, but we've expanded all of our programs to be kind of statewide since we figured what's good for the Bay is good for all of Pennsylvania. We also have an agroforestry coordinator position, which is outside of our watershed forestry team, but works within the same section and very closely with us. Our agroforestry coordinator, who had been with us for many years, just retired last week. So we will have an upcoming vacancy to fill soon. But they do a lot of the work on sort of broader agroforestry concepts like those that Audrey mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, and then we kind of cross when it comes to the multifunctional riparian forest buffer aspect. Then that's all within our Bureau of Forestry. Oh, sorry, go back one time. Oh no. There we go. Then we also have an annual buffer grant program. It's integrated into our community conservation partnerships program, which has existed for a long time, was primarily recreation focused. In 2016, we shifted to include buffers through that. So it's not perfect because it wasn't designed to fund forest buffers, but we're making it work. Some of the funding Audrey mentioned for some of the buffers in Pennsylvania is coming through that program. We also were awarded a few years ago a $3 million grant from our Pennsylvania Investment and Infrastructure Authority. It's our state revolving loan fund. They go by Penvest, and they were investing in multifunctional buffer plantings to see if they could ever turn around and produce sort of a profit so that people could pay back loans to take out to plant these things. So they'll talk more about that later. Then we do a lot of outreach and education. And we also have a very similar thing as you have been having these 2 days. It's our Watershed Forestry Summit. Ours happened in early March this year. We also have a buffer advisory committee that meets, well, they're supposed to meet quarterly. I have been slacking on that a little bit lately, to advise about all of our funding programs and things we're working on from partners across the state of Pennsylvania. And then as needed, we have flexible funding programs that can step in and fund sort of ready to go buffers, whether multifunctional or conventional, as we have funding for that. And some of that is also going towards some of those buffers that Audrey mentioned too. Okay, next slide. This is just, I'm not going to read you all of these. This is just a short little timeline. Pennsylvania really just started kind of dipping their toes heavily into focusing on forest buffers through our Department of Conservation and Natural Resources in 2016. My team was hired in early 2017. I'm the only original member remaining, but we have added staff since. We launched our grants in 2016. In fall of 2017, our first multifunctional buffers were planted through our grant program. Our regular grant program, though it is for both conventional and multifunctional buffers, does weight multifunctional buffers and rank them more highly. So if your grant application includes multifunctional buffers, you're more likely to get funded because we're invested in testing out that concept. Then we got our $3 million grant, which was to go out $1 million a year for 3 years in late 2017. The first buffers were planted with those funds in spring of 2019. And now we've had about our 6th regular grant round is open right now and will close next week. So as you can see, we've not been doing this for a super long time. And the first multifunctional buffers only went in the ground less than 5 years ago. It'll be 5 years this fall. So we really haven't seen a lot of these things come to maturity yet, but we're getting excited because that will be happening very soon. Okay, next slide. So what's popular? What are the trends that we're seeing? Audrey mentioned the extreme buffers. We are seeing a trend towards that. We typically fund buffers that are at least 35, but up to 300 feet. And we base that on the Chesapeake Bay program's definition of what is the riparian area and what's a buffer. But with these extreme buffers, we are funding things that are wider, just because if we want to see something that's profitable, like Audrey mentioned, we're aware that we need to look at those kind of options. We have also seen a trend in interest towards silvopasture buffers. I saw some chat about that in the chat, which is planting trees in pasture now, but continuing to kind of silvopasture that area. We do require a minimum of 35, preferably at least a 50-foot conventional fenced out buffer in those situations to protect the stream. And then we're trying to kind of toe the line between what would be conventional silvopasture and what is a silvopasture buffer, because in order to meet the definition of a buffer, we need canopy closure, but typically in silvopasture, you're not looking at canopy closure. So we're experimenting with things like locust. We're seeing some of our consultants work on that. Again, everything is really young, so we haven't seen how that develops yet, but it will be interesting to watch them grow. We've also seen a lot of interest in multifunctional buffers from CSAs, farms with community shared agriculture options, interest in sort of the berry crops, pawpaws, persimmons, native fruits to Pennsylvania. Should be interesting as that develops. Audrey mentioned elderberries. That's been a big trend as well. There's a lot of interest there, which is great. Then we have also seen a lot of Pennsylvania has a large plain sect population, especially sort of in central Pennsylvania. And we've seen a lot of interest from plain sect families who wouldn't implement a buffer through sort of a federal program like CREP, implementing multifunctional buffers through a state-funded program that passes through a nonprofit. So it's kind of a couple steps removed from government, and they're interested in those multifunctional buffer species, the native fruits, berries, even florals for personal family use or to sell at farm stands. And then we're starting to see an uptick in interest in urban multifunctional buffers and park settings, both for outreach purposes to get people interested in planting them on their farms, as well as for things like streamside food forests to help maybe feed a homeless population. So we'll see how all of that shapes up too. There's a lot of interest happening. We're just kind of waiting to see how these things mature. Okay, next slide. So current status and what's next. Multifunctional buffers are beginning to be just an accepted and expected part of Pennsylvania's buffer program. It's not everything we do, but people know it's something we do. They know our grants weight it more heavily. They know we often have special funding opportunities just for multifunctional buffers. And so even the partners that were sort of hesitant as we started this effort are kind of getting more on board and testing it out and seeing how it can work for them. Our regular grant program will continue to prioritize multifunctional buffers as we continue to test out this concept. Like I've said many times, we're waiting for the ones that were planted early on to produce so we can get some data off of that and understand what yields are coming back, what's that looking like. And our Pennsylvania Association for Conservation Districts, PACD, they're like the overarching organization for all of our county conservation districts, which are the same thing as soil and water conservation districts. I cannot remember what you call them in Vermont. I'm sure you have something similar. But their overarching organization was able to apply for one of our large grants, and they're making mini grants available to the county conservation districts. So they don't have to seek out the grants themselves or put match up themselves. They're able to access those mini grants through their parent organization. Of course, we have ongoing outreach and education efforts, and then we're working on some different workforce development initiatives with our state correctional department, which has been really interesting and sort of paused because of the pandemic. Hopefully we can get that back online. Plus just trying to support some, entrepreneurs that are working in this area. Okay, go ahead, next. And this is just, I'll pop these links in the chat. They are just some additional little things that you might be interested in about Pennsylvania's programs, what we have going on. A story about a silvopasture buffer that was planted with our funding, a story about one of our multifunctional buffer consultants and a video, and then information about the PACD's subgrant program for multifunctional buffers that they're doing in case you wanted to see how that was structured. And I did, never mind. That's all I have. Then I'll be quiet and let everybody else kind of take it away, and I'm happy to answer questions at the end.
Hi, everyone. Again, this is the little part of the presentation that I'm going to do. So we have a Jamboard. Probably many of you have used a Jamboard before. I dropped the link in the chat. So if you could go to the Jamboard, I think that it's really exciting to have folks from like Teddi, who's working in Pennsylvania, Propagate's working all over the country, talking about how we're implementing riparian forest buffers and incorporating multifunctional buffers or extreme buffers or agroforestry practices into thinking about how we can get those increased water quality benefits out of having those on the land. And I know there's a lot of interest in doing that in Vermont, but so far there has been some work, but more limited work in making that happen. So I've been really looking to this group of folks for guidance on how that's working in other places and what are the things that we want to think about. And I'm sure that there are plenty of people on this call who have heard a lot of questions from folks that they work with, landowners, other people about what this could look like, what's possible in Vermont. And so we were wondering, since we'll have a good chunk of time for discussion for the rest of the session when the presentation is over, what are some examples of questions you've gotten about agroforestry from farmers or landowners? And also, what are some resources that you need or want to better address questions from farmers or landowners? So there's at the left side of the screen, there's a little sticky note button. It's like a little square right in the middle, and you can grab a sticky note and just put it on the Jamboard and write a question that or answer either one or both of these questions if you've come across this in your work. We can give you all a little bit of time to think about that and post those questions.
I am not seeing a sticky tab, and I took the link that you sent. Who is it? Maybe I'm the only one. Okay.
We might not be the only one.
No, you're not the only one. I also can't find it.
Well, maybe I've done something wrong.
Allison, it might be view only.
That's possible. Yep. My bad, guys. Okay, sticky note is there now, I think. You might just have to refresh the page.
Allison, should I keep sharing my screen right now?
Sure, I think it would be great to see some of the questions that folks have as they show up.
Okay, great.
And we can give this just a couple of minutes, and then if I think Mandy is next talking about some of the specifics in Vermont, so we can also continue on with that and come back to looking at this in a minute.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. It's just like a pretty quick few minutes. So if people don't mind that, if I just pop in some info here while you're typing up these questions, might even answer a couple. Tree crops, what to consider. I already see that this is a question that's popped up on the board, on the Jamboard. So it's not unknown that Vermont, where we are and like being further north, does traditionally make these types of systems a little bit harder to see like the long-term profitability aspect. So I'd say the areas of focus that have your quickest return that can really generate interest, you're looking at elderberry. Elderberry is a little bit more commercially viable at this point than aronia, but aronia and elderberry from a native standpoint are really going to integrate really well with against a traditional riparian buffer, and will actually start producing berries within the first few years, versus when you're looking at nut crops, which chestnuts are really going to be the ones that provide us with the highest return in the quickest amount of time, which is typically 7 to 10 years. But before I get anybody excited about chestnuts, there are only going to be in the Lake Champlain Basin a really small amount of pockets that chestnuts in terms of commercial viability are actually going to work. So it's something that I hate, information I hate delivering to people, because it seems like chestnuts are kind of this like upland commercially viable nut species, but it's really in the long run not really going to be as stable as some of the other outcomes that we can get from crops like berries, purple berries in particular. So natives, we're talking about elderberry and aronia. Black currant is also, especially in the more upland areas, are also a great option. However, from a native standpoint, you're looking at these European varieties because we have white pine blight. So we really look at the European varieties because they're resistant to that. So in terms of like natives, it's just not really in that category, but it's still a great shrub species to integrate into these systems. I also just want to plug in, because I was at the mycorrhizae meeting earlier, was really excited to hear that elderberry even is possibly high phosphorus, is good for phosphorus uptake. So in terms of being able to stack that against a traditional riparian buffer, it seems like there's a lot of really great possibilities there. Not to put all my eggs in the elderberry basket, but it's definitely a crop that I'm more excited about when it comes to the Lake Champlain Basin. And then in addition to that, from the mycorrhizae conversation, part of our management practice at Propagate with implementation is actually incorporating wood chips to not only for weed suppression, organic weed suppression, and for water retention, but also to add to the mycorrhizae layer and add to just add to the soil content. So I really like to think about the opportunities that integrating a commercial agroforestry system like an elderberry system could offer to traditional riparian buffers. So if in terms of being able to offset some of the costs. So if say we wanted to integrate wood chips into a traditional riparian buffer planting, but from a cost perspective, it doesn't really make sense. If you're pairing that with a commercial system like elderberry, where we can scope the long-term economic returns, then we might actually be able to clearly offset some of that cost. And when installing a riparian buffer, offset some of the cost to do more to increase survivorship onto the agroforestry system. So very case by case, and I'm definitely an eternal optimist when it comes to that type of work. But I think that that's something really important to consider as we're talking about like, what do extreme buffers look like? And how does that help leverage us to have more traditional riparian buffers planted? So some other species that I'll call out for silvopasture, we're talking thornless honey locust, black locust, a variety of oaks, fodder, willow, and mulberry, like Audrey was talking about, which is still, there's still a lot of research being done in a small scale in the United States on this. I'd say when we're talking about fodder, some of your best opportunities when talking with farmers is going to be talking about these like marginal lands where they don't really get a lot of either, their growth capacity is low or it's wet. They only go, it's a hard to reach area for pastures. So if they're rotationally grazing, they only go once or twice a year. Integrating willow and mulberry, which are both native, as a fodder species can help with, all of the problems that we talk about with runoff going into the watershed, but are specific to kind of how do we talk about these marginal lands and not taking them out of production. Other two species with silvopasture I'll call out are poplar, and then American persimmon, which you could also integrate that into a commercial system, but it's just not something we're like modeling 10 acres of persimmon right now. And then some other options outside of, silvopasture and upland area that you could really see more integrated in with these riparian zones would be hickories like bitternut, and then serviceberry and mulberry as a fruit and not a fodder. So those are some, just to like get us start thinking about tree crops and what actually makes sense in our context. I just wanted to throw some of this out there, see if you guys have any questions. And I'm going to stop now because there's a lot of questions on this board that I think we should probably address. So thank you.
Yeah, so we've gathered a lot of questions, and some of these, this first column are examples of questions that folks have gotten from farmers or landowners. Then the second column is more like, what did the folks on this call specifically need? Although I imagine there is some overlap. And so maybe the presenters can take a look at these and we can kind of think a little bit about which ones we're able to answer now. I also want to say that if we're not able to answer all of these questions now, I really appreciate you putting them up, because it's really helpful for me and for the other folks on this call to know what kinds of things are needed by this community to increase sort of the uptake of these kinds of practices here. And so this is also sort of a longer term resource for us to figure out where we can direct some of our efforts. And I'll let you guys jump in if you see questions that you have the answers to.
Yeah, if I think, I mean, so I'm actually not going to move these around, but I think Mandy answered kind of what nut trees will grow successfully in zone 4, types and suggestion of tree species. If folks have additional questions that Mandy didn't get to, if there's more nuance there that you're looking for, feel free to add that to the chat. Fence is needed. Yes, I am so appreciative that people are talking about fencing and irrigation. So I am realizing that I failed to show you guys the modeling side of our software. So that's a very key part of the work that we do. So this is at a really high level. You know, so if we go in just looking at elderberries over 30 years, this is kind of what it will look like across time. Going to the fencing question, I think something that makes us unique from maybe say some of the other resources that are just one crop specific, we're able to help our clients understand how these multiple crops work in the holistic context of their farm operation, and kind of what are the capital expenses that they can anticipate that they're going to need. So refrigeration is an example. If you have 3 different crops that need refrigeration, depending on the capacity you need at different times of the year to move that product, how much refrigeration space do you need? We can help them think that through. So deer fencing is incredibly important because deer love to munch on elderberry and a myriad of other crops. If people probably have personal experience from that. I know I certainly do. And so that's something where we definitely recommend de-risking the operation as much as possible by incorporating deer fencing, by irrigating the system. So actually using drip irrigation, or it really depends on the context for what your farms already may be capable or able to do, but definitely we highly recommend deer fences and irrigation. We help folks model that to understand how that's going to affect their pocketbook to get these systems up and running and ensure success. And I'll just quickly note, with this particular deer fence for this particular farm, they're actually leasing land from a neighbor, and that neighbor had some concerns about putting up a bulky wooden large deer fence. And so we're putting in a 3D deer fence. It's both cheaper, but it's also less of a visual issue for her, so that her view shed isn't impaired, because that was for the folks that they're leasing from a really important thing. And we see that time and again, people really care about view sheds. So something to think about.
I'll also say with irrigation, if we're just going to explicitly use, say, elderberry and aronia as 2 berry species that we're thinking of, I'd say elderberry, no matter what, it's an extremely tenacious species, and it's a very vigorous, but I wouldn't say it will thrive without irrigation. In a drought year, you're just going to lose you're going to have a lot of issues. Aronia, on the other hand, and you need a deer fence for sure, but your returns on the elderberry at this point with the market are looking pretty good. So it makes sense to do that extra legwork. And ideally, if you're along a riparian buffer, you have access to some of that water. So with aronia, more weed resistant, more pest resistant, I have a personal hope that we can find ways to integrate aronia more into the market, and Vermont is a place that gets me more excited about it. And in terms of irrigation and deer fence, it's really mostly needed in the establishment period and in the first 3 to 5 years. So it's more of a temporary situation versus having to have a permanent situation, because it just is more vigorous and can utilize more resources to be able to sustain itself. And you don't have to rely as much on, large amounts of water or anything like that in order to have a large berry crop. So that's something that does excite me about Aronia. In terms of establishing a silvopasture system, you're not going to gear towards having any sort of irrigation setup because it doesn't really make it viable in the long term in terms of like the cost that it takes to install. So the species that you plant and where you plant them and the prep that goes into that when you're not wanting to incorporate irrigation are really important for those species, but are typically tolerable of drought. So that's something to consider when you're talking about irrigation, since that was something that came up.
And I think I want to answer this next question because it is such a key question. Will there be a market for any, not just nuts, but for any of these crops once they actually come to maturity? So one of the reasons why we designed our software the way we did is we found that one of the largest barriers for adoption of agroforestry is this uncertainty around when am I going to break out of the red, right? People kind of have this understanding it's going to be a few years before things come online, before the crops are coming to maturity. And so that's what we seek to demystify. And so we go through yield, making assumptions about per stem, how much of the offtakes harvestable products are you getting per stem. I think it's really important to note that we make some assumptions around weather, pest, and mortality. And this is something that we can kind of do some scenario planning. We have some clients that are more risk averse than others. So tweaking this to see, hey, if we make some really horrible weather for the next 2 decades, is this still going to be worth it or not for us? On the revenue side, this is where it's really important for us to work with our clients to understand how much of the value adding process they want to take on versus selling the raw product to somebody else who then is going to do that, whatever kind of post-harvest processing that needs to happen for that product. So I think elderberry is a great example where you can sell wholesale berries for, based on our market understanding, it's about $3.50 per pound that you can get. If you're selling at retail, you can get up, almost $5 per pound. But if you are able to yourself juice the elderberry and sell that juice, either directly wholesale or retail, there's a lot of bang for your buck that you can get. And that's really how you can flip it. And we help people think through the capital expenses like the destemmer, the juicing equipment, what it's going to take to actually get that system up and running if you want that vertically integrated. Or if you're like, I don't want to add that, I just want to sell it to somebody who's going to do that. Help them understand what that looks like and what the financial modeling of that is. In New York, if folks aren't already aware, there's a great organization called the New York Nut Growers Alliance. Gosh, I hope I got their name right. It's a lot of those words. New York
Northeast Nut Growers Association.
Yeah, but
Or no, that's like for the whole Northeast, not just
no, it's New York Nut Growers Alliance, who is cracking the nut, if you guys will give me that joke. They're cracking the nut on the processing equipment bottleneck that exists in the industry. And so they are, thanks to some funding from the Edwards Mother Earth Foundation, really investing in some large equipment that's, at least on a regional scale, going to really help advance the industry. So they're great folks to get connected to if that's something that. Thank you, Jesse. New York Tree Crops Alliance. There it is. I knew I didn't quite have it. So that's the kind of thing where we are going to need to see more of those processing type of coalitions come together for these regional. And so we kind of need that for purple berries in Vermont. If somebody wants to take that on, we need, the New York Tree Crops Alliance is doing it. And that's going to be very, very important for scaling. And I'll say part of the work that we do at Propagate is working with different food brands who are really excited about these products because, right, there's all these net zero emissions promises that they're making by 2030 or 2050. And there's a great story to tell with tree crops because of the climate change story, as well as something like chestnuts. Chestnuts can become chestnut flour, which is a gluten-free flour, which certain consumers get really excited about. And so there's a lot of market demand that's increasing and more of an awareness of how this can get incorporated into their supply chain. So we are having those conversations now so that we can start getting more forward contracts for these systems as they come online. I'm going to leave. Jesse has a question, Mandy. in there? That's a more of a you question than a me question.
Yes, that's a great question. Based off of the regions that we're working in right now, mostly with American elderberry, the only one that we're working with that's a cross would be Marge. So that's Negro cross with Canadensis. I've personally heard very mixed things at this point. I'd be curious if you've heard anything else, Jesse. European elderberry is kind of a miss in a lot of settings on a larger scale in the States with just our temperate zones. And there's a lot of like commercial viability and like commercial possibility with the American elderberry and the cultivars that are coming out of that. And by cultivar, it's still an American elderberry. It's just a clone of a specific elderberry, American elderberry with a specific trait that we want to continue to work with. So it could be the fruiting time or how large the berries are. So that's, oh, actually, Jesse, yes, I was hoping it was okay if I call you out on possibly talking a little bit more about the bitternut hickory stuff that you've been working with. So if you do want to jump in, I think that would answer some people's questions about like, what about nut species that do work in Vermont or work in these more northern climates, and what does that look like from a processing standpoint?
Yeah, so I have an enormous amount of information and very little certainty. So we're embarking down a path of evaluating financial viability of yellow bud while also trying to improve it as a prospect. So as of right now, all we have for harvest data is basically a single individual, Sam Thayer in northern Wisconsin, who has provided us with the data that he's collected over the past 6 years. And from averaging the harvest data and actual yields from the actual drying, husking, drying, pressing, and bottling and filtering and bottling his oil, we are taking that harvest data from kind of single species harvest, applying that by measuring drip line of each tree. And then basically what we come to is an average of about 42 gallons per acre of oil, which there's an enormous amount of issues with the data, one being the small sample size, and also being that at this point, this is just kind of one piece of many different businesses that Sam is running. And so a lot of the trees that he is going to visit have, 3 or 4 squirrels that are harvesting with him at any given time. So this is an incredibly conservative estimate. And if we were to compare this to pecans, we can see that the market potential is actually really high, even though we're really early on in our process of figuring out the proper cultural practices in terms on the propagation side, in terms of planting and nutrient management and so on. So as of right now, I think that it's by far our most promising perennial temperate oil crop. Talking with some folks at UVM that have done a fair amount of research, like Dr. Heather Darby. I was using some of her data that they found or that they've been collecting, and they got about 41 gallons per acre from their canola. So even right now, without talking about high, decades of genetic selection and implementing systems with irrigation and seed predation and so on, that drastically increase the return per acre, we're already looking like we are productivity, as far as productivity, comparative with many of our best temperate oil crops. We right now are selling at a very high price point, but that's just because we're kind of still refining our systems. It's about $60 a quart. But I can say with a very high degree of confidence that those planting riparian buffers now in the we don't really even know what the precocity is exactly, but in my opinion, probably about 10 to 12 years till they start really bringing in more income, maybe 10 to 15, the systems that we're already starting to work on will be very refined.
I want to point out that in a big part of this conversation, obviously, is talking about timelines. And in terms of thinking about a nut tree that could be integrated into these types of systems we're talking about with traditional conventional riparian buffers and some commercial viability, talking about a 10 to 15 year timeline is manageable when you're able to actually look at the long-term economic context. So a big part of trying to figure out how does agroforestry fit in, it's similar to thinking about a riparian buffer. It's like, well, I planted it, so like, when is it going to be a true riparian buffer? It takes time. So it's a really similar conversation in that way. So just to add into that, part of, you know, growing nut trees, if there's a landowner who's interested in, you know, having some more short-term return, that's when you start integrating these berry opportunities. So whether it be a U-pick operation, whether it be something more commercial like elderberry, it offsets some of that cost so that you actually have the ability to bring in income a little earlier while you're waiting for another crop to come online, as you say, and while you're waiting for your riparian buffer to come to maturity. So it's definitely a multi-staggered approach when you're trying to think of, okay, how do I approach landowners who want to just see more trees on their property overall, but need to have some sort of income generated. There's a lot of different avenues to go down. It's just like Audrey's been pointing out, you're really looking at their context and seeing what fits. So just wanting to call that timing conversation out too.
And I just, to add then a little bit onto that, something else that I see a lot when I'm having conversations with agroforestry curious people is there's often a generational question to be discussed. So either, I mean, we all know that there's an aging farming population, there might be, you know, the younger generation coming on, they might have a job in the city or you name it, right? And they're like, I don't know what to do. So there can be really interesting multi-generational questions to talk about how to shift the legacy. And we often talk about legacy because talking about profits that are going to be happening in 20 years is not really helpful for certain folks, depending on where they're at, you know, timeline wise. And so that's switching the story to legacy can be a really helpful way to continue the conversation there. Somebody just popped up a question about how do you manage the crops in a buffer, herbicide, understory. This is a great question. The main thing that I'll say, no activity. So again, we put in a minimum of 50 feet of kind of traditional riparian buffer. So that's not going to be commercially harvested in any way. So all of our extreme buffers always have that, ideally 50 or 50 plus riparian buffer. One of the things in terms of reducing herbicides, because we all know that weed pressure is incredibly important for maintenance of and success and reducing mortality, all that good stuff that we want. Our partners at Stroud Water Research Center have been doing some great research with stone mulch. So instead of using herbicides, switching to using stone mulch, which I think 2A modified, I don't know, is Teddi still on? I think it's 2A modified rock is what they use.
Yes,
and so,
absolutely, that's right.
Okay. And so that 2A modified, I wish I had a photo, sorry, I don't have a photo, is basically, it's the individual gravel, but it also has the tiny gravel in between. And so it really helps so that it's not vole habitat. It doesn't make it into a vole hotel, if you will, because the voles literally can't get at the stem, which is one of the things we're trying to reduce against. Doesn't help as much against some of the herbaceous weeds that we want to avoid, but at least it helps with some of that vole predation that happens in the wintertime. Teddi or Mandy, do you want to take any of the questions? I feel like I've taken quite a few of them.
I did just pop a link that does have a photo of some of the 2A mulch. If you scroll down in the link from Stroud, so if anyone wants to check that out. That's not a new question answer, but just to follow up on what you were saying, Audrey.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great.
There's a couple of questions about spacing in here. So from a silver pasture standpoint, to really put it very, very simply, there's kind of like two modes of transportation here. You could kind of go a tighter, denser spacing. We call it in row or in between row at like 20 by 20, or you could go 40 by 40. You could also go denser in row and wider in between row. So there's being in Vermont and just having a shorter growing season, definitely would recommend wider spacing, especially if you're looking for it to be for silvopasture. The other thing to consider here is equipment. So if you're going to be mowing or doing any sort of management activities like that with the trees, then you just, and this is something that we do in our designs, is we consider the width of all of the equipment. So thank you, Audrey. That's actually very helpful. Considering the width of all your equipment to just maximize your time out there with the trees. Like if you have an 8-foot mower, you might not want to do like a 30-foot in between spacing. You might want to make it 20, so you only have to do a couple passes. So thinking about things like that. And then with the GPS quality, that would be having accuracy with where your points are is most important when you're going to be having a higher level of management with the trees. So like I was just saying with mowing, or if you have animals and doing silvopasture, that's when having that, what we call sub-centimeter level accuracy, can be really helpful so that you're planning for your equipment properly. And that's something that we do in overyield as well. So all important, spacing is important to consider based off of your context and what you're really trying to generate. So if you're doing silvopasture and alley cropping, that's definitely most important. And then when you're thinking about a berry operation, which is more orchard style, you're thinking about your in-between row and you know, how wide your mower is, but then also whatever other type of equipment you're going to be using, whether it be for harvest or cultivation and things like that. So again, all things that are kind of outlined in overyield, like as we're building these systems, it's all of those management, what you're going to be doing to manage the trees as a crop is how you consider what your spacing is going to be and the region that you are. I hope that answers a couple of questions that were in there about that.
I'm really appreciating, I have to say, people saying that they're looking for marketing materials that help visualize it for farmers or landowners. I definitely see that as a gap. I know the National am I going to get that right? Yeah, the USDA Forest Service National Agroforestry Center last summer had a grant for some outreach materials specifically to help create more of that kind of marketing material. So I don't know obviously where those projects are at, but hopefully there are some new videos and other deliverables that kind of come out of that, because I definitely agree our industry needs more of that to help on the farmer and landowner outreach side.
I'll also call out Savannah Institute, which might be some of you know, but they are really good at creating outreach and marketing materials that are even like short 4-minute videos of case studies. So that I'd say going to Savannah Institute's website or even their YouTube page or their Facebook page would be a place that I would look as well. And
another shout out for Savannah Institute. They're also great partners of ours. They did a great report on food safety and silvopasture, which is a question that I know I at least get a lot, and maybe other people will too. So they did a really wonderful report on that. I highly recommend.
Down to the wire, two more minutes.
I know there's so many good post notes. I don't really know how to, I think, obviously who writes these agroforestry plans? So, Propagate, that's obviously what we do. We have a staff of agroforestry designers and analysts who help on both the design side, helping with both the biogeophysical reality as well as those human dimensions, right? Understanding what the business context is and what's going to make sense for the goals that that landowner or that business has for the long term. So we certainly do it. There's some other good folks that exist as well. Megan Giroux obviously is up in Vermont and does some of that work. Austin Unruh down in Pennsylvania. He's expanding his scope. He originally was just PA, but he's expanded his scope. So, I think our industry needs a lot more of kind of what Propagate's advancing, what Austin's doing, what Megan's doing. So excited for more people to get in on this because we need it to scale.
in order to have more demonstration sites, which is something that a lot of people are always looking for, is where do I go? And it's harder to find those places. But this is great. Before we forget.
Yeah, before we forget, two things. All right, Allison, you're probably trying to wrap up. Guys, there's going to be a tour. We helped Cornell get a grant so that there's going to be a field day in the Finger Lakes region of New York. The dates are September 15th and 16th. Registration isn't open yet. Highly recommend. It's going to be great if you're interested in silvopasture. And I'll say the other thing is we are working on the USDA commodity grant. I don't know if that's crossed people's tables, but if you're interested in learning more about that, we're seeking partners in the Northeast region. So would love to talk with you. We are working to have a new financial incentive to help with the adoption of commercial agroforestry. So with that, thank you all for your time and your wonderful questions.
Thanks for phoning in from Pennsylvania, Teddi, as well.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you to all three of you for this session, and those of you who aren't Vermont based to sharing what's going on in different areas. I again think it's just really helpful for folks in this region to hear about what's happening in other places as well, because a lot of people who are all kind of working in parallel, I think, with each other, and sometimes don't get the opportunity to share ideas across those sort of arbitrary boundaries. So that wraps us up our meeting for today. I wanted to thank everybody for coming to sessions, presenters for presenting really great things today. I'm going to be sending out a transcript of the chat to everybody who was registered for the meeting. So all of those amazing links and resources that are in there will be, you'll have them again. So they'll be there, and also I'll be posting recordings of today. It'll take me a couple of weeks to get them processed, but those will be up. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing most of you back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. We're going to have a session at 9 on managing herbaceous competition and invasives, and there will be somebody in that session talking about stone mulch, so connects to today. All right, that's all I've got, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.